All right, so if we look at our model, in this case I have my, let me hide. In preparing your file for the cut, it's going to be critical that number one is you test your, your new sort of pattern, right? So in my opinion, I've asked you guys between last week and this week to sort of revisit, what you're working on, try to get it together, figure out where you need to adjust the seams. And it's interesting, talking about this, and I can pause otherwise. I would, at some point, you guys sort of fixed, this is my end product, this is what I'm working with, right? And you have your curve geometry. And I think, again, I asked many, almost all of you, maybe for a few exceptions, to revisit that and retool the geometry. And I think, again, this is another thing, how do you do that, right? Based on points, lines, making new surfaces. So the idea is that you're hopefully at this point where you can start to triangulate, right? So we spent, again, I'm not going to go through every step, but after that we looked at where the seams are, right? And maybe we re-seamed it and recreated it based on those new seams to a point, right? So in this case, my seams are pretty obvious, and then we have two surfaces here, the triangulated surface, which we were using that Rhino script that we were unrolling, right? So if we have our grasshopper definition. And I want you guys asking, if there's any point where you're like, hey, this is where I'm having problem, let's talk about it now, because you're cutting soon, so. Yes?
What the sense of the final model is going to have to be in what size?
Well, this is the thing. It's not going to be specifically 2A size, because I'm going to ask you to make it as big as possible. So you have a 4x8 sheet, which is 4 foot by 8 foot. How big can you make that pattern? Okay.
So you scale it up.
Yeah, so you scale it up. So is that, in the sense of, like, I know we're always used to, like, is it, 3 inches equals a foot, or is it a half inch, or what is it? I think it's okay. We can fake that scale even after we photograph it and we put people in it. So I think it's not as critical. I think for us, the critical is using the material, okay? Which is what I saw a lot of problems last time. You guys had a lot of, sort of little parts that sort of expanded way too long, and then your cuts were really small. So you have to figure out how to sort of, at what point do you produce a new sort of slice? Sorry, I'm not going to use this one. So a lot of you guys were, you had way too small of a piece, which became problematic. Sorry, let me open up the. I guess I have this up on the Google Drive. So again, when we pick our new surface, there's a couple things we're probably going to have to do. Depending on, we can swap the UVs. So if you see your surface is not being generated properly, it's most likely because the UVs are flipped. So you can change that. The other thing is keeping probably this number consistent, which is the division, is going to be important. And you can see how that gets simplified, right? Based off of what we had there before. So, and again, the reason why the UVs might be important is keeping the count. The one thing we'll find out, if we pick certain surfaces, we might lose some of the corners. So you got to fill in the gap. So you have to be really aware, right? So we're not doing this blindly and just doing it. You have to be aware of what's happening. So you have full control. The one issue that we're going to run into is when we start overlapping, right? What we did last week, where we took one versus the other, because we were trying to project. We're going to try both conditions. So this is our grasshopper definition, unrolling that. So that's the surface that's up there, and then this is our flattened surface, right? So you're doing this for each of the surfaces, triangulating them and then flattening them, all right? So before we were doing it manually, so now we have this that assists us, right? So again, I would keep this very organized, so you have these on different layers, especially as we bake them. So let's go ahead and make a new layer. So we'll call this O2, make it current. And I'm going to go ahead and bake both of these. And we can close this, all right? Just going to delete this for right now. Okay, so we have our surface there, and now we have our individual surface, right? So this has actually been joined. This has not been joined yet. And we're going to try to project on this again and see if we can get this to work. But this would be the first part that you're working on, right? So you're unrolling this. You can also do it manually. You can, if you want to have sort of numbers, we can take this and join it. So I can take this piece and join this. And explode no, label yes. Okay. And this will unroll it. Similar to what we have here. Of course, it's actually flipped, but that's not a big deal. So I think that can also be to have a little bit more control over it and understand it. The other thing is that we talked about last week is after we sort of do that, the one issue that we were running into the cuts was having this redrawn as a curved line, right? So after we sort of unroll it, we want to introduce a new profile edge, right? In the end, all we really need is that profile condition that produces that, right? So what we can do from there is we can use the same layer, which is fine. So we can do our curves, and we're going to do a free form, and we're going to do interpolate points, and we can do endpoints. So those are ISO curves. So where we know we have sort of curved geometry, we draw a curved line, so we have now that curved line running along there. We know this is straight, because that's part of the opening, right? So again, you have to be aware of what you're doing. And what I saw last time, a lot of you guys were just coming in quite baffled by your own piece because you weren't keeping track. I would do this to eliminate, when we saw this, is where this thing, the material doesn't like sort of stepping, right? So we're tricking it into being sort of triangulated, but then we're bringing it back to a curve. So this assists in the joint being a little bit more flush. All right? So it eliminates that sort of ragged edge that we were getting when we were trying to put them together. Now, because we're going to get larger, it's going to help us if we didn't do this, but at the same time, I think it's going to be better to have that curved geometry. Now, you want to keep, I'm just doing this separating so you can see it. You want to keep this together, especially where we might put two pieces together, right? At some point, we might take two patterns and put them together. So that way, when we cut this thing out, it's not a bunch of little pieces. There's some connection points. So we'll look at that in a little bit. Well, that's what I mean. You might need to keep a triangulation. Yeah, and they can't overlap. So at some point, yeah, they might cross each other. So you got to figure out where you might be able to do that. I know, it's tricky.
The curves are
I know, yeah. No, it's, but some, everybody was somewhat a way to sort of start sort of fingering it together to some point. It just helps it having it maybe a little bit together, so as you put it together, there's something keeping it together. So it doesn't, you're not just all these little pieces you're trying to put together. Does that make sense? So it's easier to have this thing like assembled key location. So as you start to turn it on itself, it sort of wants to go the way it wants to go versus just trying to add panels, attach panels. So let's look at that.
It's hard to, after you have all and something overlaps, it's really hard to explode it and move triangles around, because some of them are mirrored one way, some of them
Yeah, that's what I mean. You got to know what's going on. You got to be aware. Yeah, you can dumb this down and have fewer triangulations. I mean, also too, if you select this and go to properties, you can turn off ISO curves. So show surface ISO curves. It just helps less, less complexity. But let's look at this, at least on mine. Let's go ahead and show again. Oh, let's go ahead and turn on surface. So let's look at what this surface does, all right? So let me bring up my definition. And again, yeah, you have to be aware. Now we have to test. Is this thing, flip the right way? I mean, from what I can tell, we can take some quick measurements. I can tell where it triangulates, right? So this piece is definitely that, and it goes to a point. So I would say it's facing down, so I need to flip it, right?
have pieces that at some point shift from inside to outside. So in the paper thing, some pieces, some parts will go.
Yeah, because you didn't mirror them.
Not like, not the whole piece, only part.
I can't imagine that's happening. Like after you joined it, it flips it. Like half of it goes this way, and the other half goes that way.
Yeah.
You joining it?
Because it turns and wraps.
I don't know. I haven't seen that happen. I understand what you're saying, but I haven't seen that happen. Make sure I got the right surface. What's that one? And sometimes, yeah, like I can see I'm having problems with that surface. Like it doesn't want to go until I flip the UVs, you know. So this UV flipping is important, okay? Like if you're doing it, hey, nothing's happening. So the other thing, what I'm doing here, I'm missing the triangle ends. See how I'm missing the tips? So this is one where we would probably just take this and bake it. Let me make a new layer. You can see, I can hide this. I'm missing geometry there. So I have to fill in the gaps. Oops.
The actual calculation doesn't line up. One of the scenes.
Yeah, it's okay. Would it be better to spend some time and get it to line up? Yeah. But I would have to calculate now, okay, it doesn't do the ends. So I would need to reduce it. We can try, let's try. So if we go back to our grasshopper definition. So still not lining up. Yeah, I think it's just going to be quite impossible to. It's because it's not getting. Let's see if we increase it to. Well, I guess we're losing two. Yeah, even though we're losing those two, it's because we're losing the ends. So the way it's dividing that is not working out. Again, if you do it manually, you can control that, right? So when we were doing it manually, it wasn't an issue. It shouldn't be a problem because we're curving it now. So before it was important to get those edges to meet, where now if we curve that edge, and you saw even having it curved or not curved, it still becomes problematic. So let's go ahead and bake that. Yeah, it's a bunch of things. It's because that edge is different than these edges don't match up. I think the way it's dividing the edges is problematic. And plus it's not doing those two ends. So we have to fill in the gap. Okay, so we have that, and then we can join that. Again, use layers to control this thing. Sorry, I'm going to do this. So now we have to decide, like, if we want to figure out where that goes, you know, we have to make sure we have this flipped. So I know this is based on what I can see. This triangle here is that top one. But if I look at that, the triangle's on the right side, right? So when it's laid out, in this case, it's on the left side. So this needs to get flipped, right? So it's basically flipped upside down. So a couple ways you can do it. We can you can take this geometry and mirror it. Okay, so now we have it. So what do you want? Do you want the outside to be top, inside to be the bottom? I think that's the most logical sense. All right. And then we can get it orientated. So I think you guys have to like okay, if like I'm used to seeing it from that direction, maybe I need to take this and also rotate it, right? I think whatever you can do to sort of help you position this thing, okay? So now I know I'm looking at this one. I understand that that corner there is that corner, right? Now, by not having the triangles line up, it's a little trickier to get it positioned, right? Because the distances down this line won't line up perfectly. So, again, you might need to still do this somewhat manually if you want to put certain pieces together. Like if I look at this piece now, all right, I assume it's the right way, but it could be also flipped. This piece can be the top piece, right? And that piece can be the bottom piece. And I think that's actually the case by me just visually looking at it, okay? So this is also needs to get mirrored and rotated. So yeah, these two would, based on what I'm seeing, they would overlap, right? So I can't put this on somewhere here because they just overlap. But this piece might work on the other piece here. So as you lay them out, you can start to figure out where you might get two pieces going away from each other that can butt up against each other. So that's why I think it's important to lay out each piece individually and then go back and then figure out, you know, how you might start to assemble it, all right? So I think you have to sort of keep your sanity by getting things positioned right. Again, that's why I think it's critical to maybe, you've done this already, right, somewhat earlier, so you can look at it, you sort of understand it. There was certain areas that were going together. But again, a few of you had pieces that were just too separate, right? Like a bunch of chunks that you try to put together. And I think that's a mistake. I think it should be more continuous. And then some of you tried to put it all together, but had too much complexity, where you couldn't get the material to do what it's supposed to. All right, is that making sense so far, guys? Yes? Okay. So we have that. We have these two. The last thing, and you know, last week we looked at this idea of doing these sort of perforations or sort of taking away material. I'm eliminating that. I really went through that and I said, wow, no one's going to be able to do that by Thursday or Friday or Monday. So, you know, I'm trying to help you guys. I think getting these things to be drawn on might be enough challenging to get the patterns. So I want to focus on the patterns next. So after you have this laid out, you might be doing this again with the patterns. So there's like, I know you guys you guys want it to be where you just sit down and you just go A, B, C, and you're done. Unfortunately, to do this type of sort of fabrication, it's not possible, right? It's like you're sort of testing things, you're working this. I would take this pattern, print it out 11 by 17, cut it out of foam, put it together. Is it doing what you think it's doing, right? You don't want to spend all this time cutting the material and then realizing, oh no, that one was mirrored, you know? And then you got to like cut it out and then it's not you know? So testing this before you go there, I think, is critical. So, who's going on Thursday? Anybody here that's going on Thursday? Those guys aren't here. You're ready to go? So you got to make a full model before, you know? I don't think you can just show up with like if people show up with this, you're obviously you're going to be sent away, right? Like you're coming in with ready to cut files, proven it's going to go together, you've tested it. You guys have to test these things, all right? So you've been, you know, Many of you have been sort of pushing this class, pushing it. It's caught up to you now. You got to sit down and spend time on it, all right? Otherwise, you're going to be just cutting to cut, and then you'll come in and you'll say, hey, nothing goes together. I think, you know, it goes together. We have one prove, and we have like a half one over there that's going together. So, huh? That's yours? Yeah, see, it's going together. So it's important to do this, all right? That one looks very painfully put together.
It was painful.
It's like you need to like put your sleeve back on your shirt, but you only have Band-Aids.
I actually ran out of.
You ran out of tape? All right. All right, so let's look at the patterning part. There it is, layer one. Okay. So we went over the process of getting the geometry, right, on there, right? I'm not going to go over this again. But you're working with some type of pattern. Again, something that you can generate. It's up to you. In my opinion now, you can do something different. We're using this razzle-dazzle as a technique. And we are focusing on camouflage, okay? Sort of, again, here's another. We're using line techniques that are projected to sort of play against even the seams of our model, right? So how do we start to use patterns to do this is critical. So I'm going to just focus on these two surfaces. This and that. And again, we have to do this from the view that it's the front view. So if we select this and then we do our project, we can then select and project this. And we're having, at least in the past I've been having issues where they don't unroll, but let's give it a try. So this is now projected onto the surface. And then the next thing is to do the unroll with the line geometry, right? So if we do the unroll surface, and then select all the, and we can select all the curves. And it actually looks like it works. Okay? So this will allow us to put the pattern now onto the surface. Now the only drawback of going this route is that all the lines are stepped. They're not curved. Which is actually a nice sort of artifact, right? Because we sort of, in the end, we eliminate, we add the triangulation, we then cut it in a way where we eliminate the triangulation, but now we're adding the pattern as a triangulation. All right? So it's like we see the process. All right? So that line geometry is actually quite stepped because of that. Does this make sense, guys? So that eliminated what we needed to do before. Now, if we draw the curve, we still need to extend the lines then. So we're probably not going to get perfect connections, but that's fine. So what I mean by that is we now draw the free form. I missed that. Okay. And then we hide this. We have some areas where it doesn't extend. To be honest with you, I think it's fine. I think you don't need to spend time extending it. Okay? Okay, so in this case now we're going to have, so again we're eliminating sort of the perforation part. I think because we're using the bigger material, which is you have 4x8 now, this piece is going to be almost twice the size of that, so it'll be easier to manipulate. Again, we're not doing the zip ties. We are going to tape this thing together using packaging tape, like you see here, but you're going to do it on the inside. So it'll be big enough to where you should be able to assemble it on the inside. Doesn't mean that you might not need to put some on the outside at some point, right? That might need to be removed after, right? So this seems to be working really well. This is again the thicker stuff, and you'll have more room per se to deal with it, right? So after you've done this and set this up, we're basically setting up two techniques. One is going to be the engraving technique, which is for the Sharpie, for the CNC, and then the other is the cut, okay, the profiling. All right. So let me stop the video here. I'm going to get a new one recorded.